Hello and welcome to my channel. I have a bit of an unusual video today. Some of you may recognise this image as the Istanbul Rocket, and this model is thought to be 3,000 years old. Whether it's based off a real item or it's just a novelty shaped loofah, I'm going to have a go at making one. So this is still going to be a scale model, but I just want to try and make it look a little bit more believable. So I start out by sketching the basic design, and this will give me something to work from. I decided that this sketch was just a little bit too small, so I'm going to make the actual model about 10 or 15% bigger, and I realised that it looks a little bit like Dick Dastardly's car from Wacky Races. I decided that I needed a core in which to stick other items to, so I cut this tube to size, and I need to create a pair of identical discs. As you can see, I'm doing this the old fashioned way, with no power tools. I just need to neaten up each of the edges so that they match. Then I cut out a hole in the centre, just big enough to insert the tube. This doesn't need to be too neat as it won't be seen. Both discs can now be slid onto the tube and placed the correct distance apart. This now needs to be covered in 16 slats to create a circle. If necessary, you can cut them oversized and they can be sanded back afterwards. I'm using PVC cement to attach everything as it will weld it all together, although super glue also works very well with this material. The last piece needed to be trimmed ever so slightly for that perfect fit. Now I just need to give it a bit of a sanding, and this neatens everything up, and will make each of the parts look a bit more uniformed rather than handmade. The sanding stick is a good choice as it's nice and flat and level. I need to make a spacer ring, so I heat up a strip of styrene and wrap it around an appropriate sized object, and this will give me the curve that I need. And it's just a matter of trimming it down, gluing the tips together and form the actual ring, and then that can be secured into place. In order to work on the cone shape, I needed to extend the tube, and that length looked about right to me. Now I need to measure and cut out 16 identical pieces. In order for this to work, one side has to be narrower than the other, so when you apply them one at a time, you end up with a cone shape. Rubber bands are great for holding conical shape together while the glue sets. All the pieces are a little bit offset, so they need sanding back until they're level, and then some of the larger gaps can be filled in with some putty, followed by another round of sanding to make sure everything is flush. And I also use the heat gun to bend into shape this top piece. It's not a perfect fit, but I can fill in the gap with some putty. But first I need to glue it into shape, then hold it down with some elastic bands. It's either that or physically holding on to it for a couple of minutes. I need to make another ring, and this will go on the back of the cone. I simply replicate the same process as the last one. Since that's the front third section done, I can turn my attention to filling in the gaps. And this time I'm using milliput, as this is very malleable and it will set solid. For the middle section, I heated up a 5mm styrene board and curved it round. It didn't turn out perfect, so it needed a little bit of sanding and fine tuning. I made another wheel for the back, so at this time there's a gap in it, so it will slot in place. And that's capped off by a ring, which also joins onto the base. I had to use a few clamps to force everything into place while the glue set. That now gives me the foundation to build the rest of this section. The flooring needs to be flat, so I added a false bottom. For the mini jet, I cut down a small piece of pipe, and by adding the slot, it will grip firmly to the top, so this way it won't try and roll off. I cap off one end with a piece of styrene, and for the opposite end where the turbine is, I glue on a thicker piece, and then I can sand it down until it roughly resembles a cone. Then I use the sculpting tool to score in the details on the tip, and this will represent the turbine blades. I then create the pilot seat out of 3 individual pieces of styrene. These are then rounded off at the edges for that cushioned effect. Then I dry fit them first before gluing them down. You can't really tell on here, but I did stand down a slump in the middle of each cushion, and that should help make it look like it's being used. Well, this is how it looks when everything's glued together. Now I'm going to attach both halves together, then I'm going to start work on the steering console. As you can see, I've already attached the first couple of layers, and this is where the feet will go. And this will also give me extra point of contact and make it stronger. I have a lot more gaps now, so I'll get them filled in. And once again I'm using milliput, which is an epoxy resin and very tough, so this will strengthen all the weak joints. Next I'm putting together the steering mechanism. I use my file to create a little bit of surface detail, because after all I'm wanting this to look like a real vehicle rather than a rock carving. For now the steering is just slotted into place with friction. It will be glued in permanently after painting. Next we've got the thrusters to do at the rear. First I cut out the back plate, then I add a couple of spacers and glue it in place. Then I repeat the same process as I did with the other circular sections by adding tiles until the gap is covered, and once it's done the back end will flare out a little bit. Next I'm going to cut down this PVC pipe to make the 3 smaller thrusters. I had to sand them down afterwards to make sure they're perfectly level, and just like with their larger counterpart, these are going to need to flare out at one end. So I'll repeat the same process but cut everything down a little bit smaller, and after a good sanding they're looking nice and neat. And now these can be glued onto the back. The single one goes on the top and the double goes on the bottom, and that's the basics of the rocket complete. Next I'm going to work on some of the additional details. I decided it would be beneficial to have some landing legs, and the styrene rod is of the right thickness, so using my little hand drill I made 4 holes. Then I insert the rod and cut them down to size. So now the model no longer rolls over. Using the same styrene rod I cut off some small slices, and these I turned into little buttons which fit very nicely on the steering wheel. Plus I also placed them on any blank space. This not only helps to break it up but also provides additional functions. The final detail I add are these little rectangle blocks. They have one on each side so they're symmetrical. You can also see they've added some styrene strips around the rocket and other places. Now it's time to prime. So I'll go with my usual grey primer, and once it's all covered I'll give it a light sanding. This just makes the surface nice and smooth again, plus it also helps to fill in some of the smaller gaps. I went back and forth over what the colour should be before deciding upon silver, as this rocket could be a precursor to the modern day flying UFOs, so it would make sense to be made out of similar material. Now I need to make sure it hasn't looked like it comes straight from the showroom, and this black liquid shoe polish will do the job perfectly. It needs slapping on everywhere, especially in the recesses, and then when it starts to get tacky, most of it can be dabbed off with a tissue. We just want to leave behind a thin uneven film, as that's the key to creating a natural look. To bring a little bit of the shine back to the surface, I drive this on some more silver. This looks strange being all silver, so I'm going to paint on some black accents, and this will help to break it up a little bit. Plus it helps to indicate the loads of different materials were used, just like with modern vehicles. I also painted the seats and the steering column in black, and these items alone really help to add some balance to the colour scheme. It might be just me, but it's starting to look a little bit like the DeLorean from Back to the Future. Anyway, I just added some more little bits and pieces, and then I sprayed it all with some lacquer, and then it's time to leave this to dry and call it done. So there you have it, my interpretation of the Istanbul Rocket. The biggest difference between mine and the original card model is I didn't include the pilot, as he kinda looked like the Michelin Man, and that was a little bit too cartoony for me. So the original model is about 3,000 years old, and it was carved out of stone. To our modern eyes it looks a lot like a rocket, although you need a pretty good alternative to convince me otherwise. So it could either have been a concept by a crazy scientist, or these things were flying about and somebody copied them. In which case, what colour was it? What details are missing? Hence, my project, where I try to provide the answers. What about you guys? What do you think the Istanbul Rocket is? Sound off in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Don't forget, if I can do it, so can you.